Welcome, Dr. Epic here. And in this lecture, we're going to talk about myth, we're going to talk about silk, cinnamon, sugar, ocean voyages, African kings, and why math is so important. We're going to follow that outline right up above my head, and we are going to tackle the historical debate about Christopher Columbus, intrepid explorer, American hero, or genocidal conqueror. Now, you need to remember this, that although not all historical opinions are equally valid, history as a discipline is itself subjective. And history is characterized by informed, emotional, passionate debate. People argue about history all the time. Because you have to understand that there is not a single narrative in terms of American history. That's the problem with history classes. There are indeed multiple narratives, and historians debate about which narrative about the past is supported by evidence from the historical record. And that's what we're going to do right here. Because there's no character, there's no individual in American history with such divergent narratives than Christopher Columbus himself. There's books about Christopher Columbus, how an Italian explorer became an American hero. There's books about Christopher Columbus and the lies told about him. You know, is Christopher Columbus an intrepid explorer? Is he guilty? Columbus, the criminal, guilty of war, genocide, sexual violence, theft, racism. There is tremendous historical debate about the figure of Christopher Columbus, which is what we're going to look at right here. Now, this is how most people learn about Christopher Columbus, you know, from elementary school, from coloring books, from cartoons. And this is a cartoon. This is not some coloring book, you know, pulled from a school book from 1960. This is a book published, 2018. And you see, it's a coloring book. Christopher Columbus was an early explorer. He was born in Genoa, Italy. He started sailing when he was a teenager. The King and Queen of Spain sent him on a quest. All of these things are true. These are true historical facts. But Christopher Columbus was not a cartoon character. He was a real person. He did things in history. But the debate about Christopher Columbus is itself highly contentious. And that's what we're going to do right here. We're going to take the historical record. We're going to look at what people wrote in the 16th century. We're going to peel back these layers of myth about Columbus. And we're going to look at the historical Columbus and evaluate what people wrote about Columbus during the lifetime or just after the lifetime of Columbus. And we're going to use the historical record to answer that question right there. So put that question in your notes and have it sort of rotating and percolating in the back of your brain as we move through this lecture. And the question is, was Christopher Columbus an intrepid explorer who created America, or a genocidal conqueror responsible for theft, slavery, and genocide? Use the information from this lecture to build and support a thesis that argues one way or another, or even create your own hypothesis, your own historical narrative. And finally, answer the question, should Columbus Day be celebrated? And use the historical record to defend your opinion. Now, particularly important to the debate about Christopher Columbus is this concept of historiography. I mean, there it is right at the top, and it's in all caps, so you know it's important. Historiography is the study of how historians actually write history. Historiography includes examining why people are writing their version of history and an examination of their motives in writing history. And in terms of Columbus, this gets very important. You have to ask yourself, why are people writing why they did? History is never objective. All of these people are writing history and they're trying to do things. They're trying to move the narrative in the direction they want it to be in. People write histories with very firm biases. And some of the people we're going to talk about in the 16th century have very firm biases. They have ulterior motives in writing what they do about Christopher Columbus. And Christopher Columbus himself wrote. I mean, he contributed to the historical record. And he has very firm biases about him. Why does any of this matter? Why do people really care about Columbus? Why is this debate so contentious in American history? First off, there is Columbus Day itself. There are statues to Christopher Columbus. There's the statue of Columbus in New York. not covered with red paint. Now, Columbus Day itself is, it's the second Monday in November. It is a federal holiday. It's been a federal holiday since 1892. And as you can see here, it's a state holiday in many states. And some states split the difference. They have both Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. And in fact, there's not just a Columbus Day, there's Columbus Day parades. Columbus Day, of course, itself celebrates the discovery of America. It celebrates Christopher Columbus. But more importantly, probably more importantly, Columbus Day is there to celebrate Italian Americans. It is the Italian American national holiday. And there's parades throughout the country. The biggest and most important parade is in New York City. They have a parade, they have floats. There's a caravel right there. I don't know if that's the Nina, the Pinta, or the Santa Maria, but there it is. There's little kids on it. Right up above me, there's the governor of New York State marching with the Italian American community. They're flying little Italian flags, and they're celebrating Columbus Day. And Columbus Day itself comes out of the very late 19th century. It was created by Italian Americans to celebrate the contributions of Italian immigrants to the American nation. It was made a federal holiday for the first time in 1892, and that year is very, very important because it was an election year, and the president who was running for re-election really wanted the Italian vote in 1892. And this was done because large numbers of Italian immigrants started to flow into the United States. Basically between about 1880 and 1920 is when the large waves of immigration are coming out of Italy, especially southern Italy. And immigrants that were arriving from Sicily, from Naples, from northern Italy, they faced strong opposition. They faced widespread discrimination throughout the 1880s, and this boiled over into one of the worst instances of mass violence in American history, the mass lynchings of 1891. What had happened was that mafia gangsters publicly murdered the police chief of New Orleans. They shot him in broad daylight. And in the French Quarter, this huge anti-Italian mob began to form. People started giving angry speeches. This riot broke out. This angry mob stormed into the part of New Orleans known as Little Italy, broke into people's houses. They broke into people's businesses. They dragged, 11 Italian immigrants, the people they thought were guilty for murdering the police chief. They dragged them back to the French Quarter and hung them from the lampposts in the French Quarter. So if you ever go to New Orleans and go to the French Quarter, it's absolutely beautiful. It's absolutely lovely. And if you get a little shiver when you walk by one of the lampposts, it's because they used to execute people on those lampposts. They hung them. And this caused a big problem in the United States. The Italians in New York, the Italian Americans in Chicago were very, very upset at this mass lynching in New Orleans. And they demanded action from the federal government. And they got it from a Republican president who was worried about re-election. Now, Italian Americans were entering the mainstream of American politics at this time by voting, by prospering, by participating in American society. And these Italian Americans began to make a set of demands. And one of their demands was they wanted protection against lynching. They wanted protection by the federal government. And they wanted a holiday. And they got it. They wanted Columbus Day, a day to celebrate the contribution of Italians to the American nation. And indeed, the architect of Columbus Day is that fellow there on the left, Angelo Noyce, who is known as the founder of Columbus Day in the United States. And they wanted a parade, they wanted days off, and here are pictures of the Columbus Day parades through history. There's a parade, I believe that one's right around 1900. There's another Columbus Day parade. They've got American flags, they've got Italian flags, they've got people dressed up as Indians. They've got a day of celebration. All of this was carefully orchestrated by Angelo Noyce, who promised the Italian-American vote to the President Benjamin Harrison, who really wanted to get reelected in 1892. So he agreed to it. And in 1892, a desperate president creates Columbus Day. He didn't win re-election, though. It didn't help. And Columbus Day has been a federal holiday ever since. Yet in recent years, in the past few decades, Columbus Day has come under this really withering critique as alternative historical narratives have emerged about Christopher Columbus. And here's a article from about 15 years ago. Goodbye Columbus, holiday in decline as brutal legacy reevaluated. And when you have Columbus Day parades, it is not uncommon at all to get Columbus Day protesters. People turning out saying, abolish Columbus Day. Genocide is nothing to celebrate. Columbus was a rapist. I will give you golden slaves, as many as they shall order. That's a misquote from Columbus, but as we'll see, it's not inaccurate. And Columbus Day celebrations have now become contentious gatherings where Native American activists will often clash with Italian Americans. And that's what we see there on the lower left. An Italian businessman ferociously arguing with a Native American activist. They almost came to blows in the middle of this interview. They almost started hitting each other. And violence has broken out, and violence has been threatened around these statues of Christopher Columbus. During the big urban riots of 2020, statues came under attack. And it wasn't just Confederate heroes getting ripped down. It was Christopher Columbus in particular. There's the Christopher Columbus statue in Boston, Massachusetts. One of these protests got rowdy, they got angry, they attacked the statue, and they cut his head off. They beheaded the statue of Christopher Columbus. Now, the city of Boston, to prevent further violence, actually ended up removing the statue of Christopher Columbus. And you can see from the news story there in the middle, another protest defamed even the plinth that the statue was standing on. In Philadelphia, another group of angry protesters and rioters descended on Marconi Plaza, named after a prominent Italian American, to attack the statue there, and were turned back by locals. And you can see the locals there on the left, local Italian Americans turning out to defend the statue of Christopher Columbus. Flying American flags, flying Italian flags in body armor with rifles. So people showed up to defend the statue of Columbus in Marconi Plaza. And again, to prevent any kind of armed conflict, to prevent violence from breaking out, the city did eventually remove that statue because they didn't want anybody getting shot over what is a hunk of stone. But it's not a hunk of stone to those guys. They're showing up to defend this hunk of stone. It is a monument in their minds to the contribution of Italian immigrants to this country. Now, you've seen a pair of sort of cartoon depictions of two very different narratives about Christopher Columbus. Adam Conover versus Stephen Crowder. And you saw these kind of very funny, historical debates about how to best interpret the legacy of Christopher Columbus. Adam Conover is very much anti-Columbus. Stephen Crowder is very much pro-Columbus. But the thing is, these guys are comedians. They're comedians. They're comedians. These guys are not scholarly historians. And their research teams, frankly, are not very good. But this is indicative of the debate going on over Christopher Columbus. Was Christopher Columbus the first person to discover the America? Was he the first person to cross the Atlantic? What is the correct historical narrative to pin onto this individual? American hero, intrepid explorer, genocidal conqueror, part-time rapist. Let's actually examine the legacy of Christopher Columbus. Was Christopher Columbus the first person to discover the Americas? Well, we know what the evidence says, and that is clearly no. Christopher Columbus was not the first person to discover the Americas. The archaeology on this is very, very clear. Unlike history, archaeology is objective. And the objective archaeology can clearly point out the first people to discover the Americas were the first Americans, the Paleo-Indians, who crossed from the old world. They crossed from Siberia across a land that doesn't even exist anymore, a land called Beringia. It's now at the bottom of the ocean. Through the ice-free corridor, roughly around 15,000 years ago. The first Americans are the first people to discover the Americas. They did it way back at the end of the Ice Age. Was Columbus the first European to cross the Atlantic? Again, the answer is no. And the archaeology is very clear on this. The first Europeans to cross the Atlantic were the Vikings, the Norsemen. Now, the Viking sagas said this, 1,000 years ago, that Eric the Red and his son, Leif Erikson, around the year 1000 AD, sail along the northern edge of the Atlantic to find the land that we today call Canada, Quebec, and Newfoundland. They called it Vinland. And again, the visitation, the Viking crossing of the Atlantic has been confirmed by archaeology. And around AD 1000, the Vikings were the first people to place a European colony in the Americas. It's been confirmed by the archaeology. It actually happened. Columbus was not the first person to discover the Americas. He was not the first European to cross the Atlantic. He wasn't the first European to put a colony in the New World. Now, the Viking colony failed, probably only after a single year. But I mean, when we get into the section on colonies, we'll find out this is not atypical. Most of the European colonies failed. So who was Christopher Columbus? Who was Christopher Columbus? We actually know surprisingly little about Christopher Columbus. We know when he was born. We know when he died. He born 1451, died 1506. He was only 55 years old when he died. But one of the things about Christopher Columbus is we have all these different images of Columbus. Which of these is the real Columbus? And the answer is, of course, none of them. We have no idea what Christopher Columbus actually looked like. His depiction was never taken down during his lifetime. So the result is we only have a handful of written descriptions of Christopher Columbus, and they all disagree with one another. We don't know if he had a long face. We don't know if he had a round face. We don't know if he had a full beard or was clean shaven. We didn't know if he had a receding hairline or wavy hair that was shoulder length. We have no idea what Christopher Columbus looked like. Before he discovered the Americas, he wasn't important enough to paint. And after he discovered the Americas, no one wanted to paint an image of him for reasons that we will explore. So the result is that when we do paint pictures or have illustrations of Christopher Columbus, they're essentially made up. The artist simply makes them up. All of these images are equally valid pictures of Columbus. Now, the most common one that is used is up there on the upper left, and we actually know for a fact it is not Christopher Columbus. It is a bishop of Verona, if I remember correctly. And it was a bishop of Verona. It was painted by the painter, and apparently he had it lying around. And he was told that he needed a portrait of Columbus, but nobody knew what Columbus looked like. So he actually took this other painting and just wrote on the top that this was Christopher Columbus. Who's going to disagree with him? And he got paid in the end. So now, Christopher Columbus was part of a much larger movement in European history, something called the Age of Discovery. And there's many different time periods, many different dates have been attached to the Age of Discovery. I like these dates, 1487 to 1534. We start with the Portuguese explorations down the coast of Africa, and we kind of end with the circumnavigation of the globe. So what was the Age of Discovery? It's important because it's in all caps up there. So what was the Age of Discovery? The Age of Discovery was a period in world history where European sailors and navigators proceeded to explore by sea, proceeded to explore most of the world. They discovered the Americas, they discovered East Asia, and they circumnavigated the world. In fact, they were the first people to circumnavigate the world. And the Age of Discovery was launched in order to reach the lands of the Indies, and I'll explain what those are in a bit. Because the Age of Discovery was meant to solve a problem. And the problem it was to solve was the problem with the Silk Road. Right up above me is a map of the Silk Road. What is the Silk Road? Okay, again, another definition you need to know. The Silk Road was an ancient trade route that connected Europe to the lands of the Indies. The lands of the Indies. And the Silk Road possesses great antiquity. It goes all the way back to classical Greece. It goes all the way back to classical Rome. And one of the really weird things about history is the ancient Romans knew about ancient China. In fact, they exchanged correspondence along the Silk Road. And the Silk Road stretched from Europe to the lands of the Indies. And what they moved along this road was a lot of really cool things. And we'll discuss exactly what's moving along the Silk Road in a tick. But the Silk Road existed for thousands of years. Silk, cinnamon, cardamom, gold, silver moved back and forth along the Silk Road. And in fact, finding like Roman coins in India or finding Roman artifacts in Japan is not uncommon. It happens on a fairly regular basis as the Romans purchased these incredible materials from the East, from India and from Japan. Now, what exactly are the lands of the Indies? A lot of people just say, oh, he was looking for India. They're looking for India. They're looking for East Asia. That's not exactly accurate. They are looking for the lands of the Indies. Okay, so what are the lands of the Indies? The lands of the Indies are China, India itself, an island called Chipangu. Write that down, Cipangu, Chipangu. Now, Chipangu is modern-day Japan, but they just called it Chipangu. And the Spice Islands. The Spice Islands are today Indonesia. So the lands of the Indies are China, India, Chipangu, which is Japan, and the Spice Islands, which is Indonesia. And why are they trying to get to the lands of the Indies? They're trying to get to the lands of the Indies because the lands of the Indies had all the cool stuff. All the cool stuff was coming out of East Asia. Basically, the civilizations and cultures of East Asia were quantitatively and technologically superior to what was going on in Europe. Because China and India and Japan and Indonesia had a lot of stuff that the Europeans really wanted. And they moved the stuff along the Silk Road. This included things like cinnamon, coming from the Spice Islands, sugar, coming from India, cotton, coming from India, cardamom and saffron, these spices coming from the Spice Islands, porcelain coming from Japan and China. There's a Ming vase. In fact, even to this day, really high quality porcelain is known as fine china. Europeans didn't know how to make porcelain. Europeans couldn't grow sugar or cardamom or saffron or cinnamon or any of that cool stuff. And the Europeans especially didn't know how to make silk. All right. They thought silk was this incredibly magical substance. They didn't know how it was made. In fact, if you told a European exactly how silk was made, they probably wouldn't believe you. It comes from worms, comes from caterpillars. That all of this stuff was coming out of Asia, coming out of the lands of the Indies, and traveling along the Silk Road to Europe, traveling through the Middle East. And the Silk Road had this allure to it and had this legendary, it was surrounded by myths and legends. It was super exotic as all of these materials slowly made their way across Asia on the backs of camels or on the backs of horses in these huge caravans traveling from China across Central Asia to the Middle East, where they would then be sold to the Italian city-states and then distributed across Europe. And the Silk Road acquires all of this mythological meaning, and it's strange and weird and exotic, and it connects the lands of Europe to these incredibly bizarre advanced civilizations in China. And one of the first Europeans to travel the length of the Silk Road and write about his journeys is a man named Marco Polo, who had no idea he would become a 21st century pool game for little kids. Anyway, Marco Polo travels from Venice across the entire length of the Silk Road, and he ends up in China, where he meets the Emperor of China, a guy called Kublai Khan. And then he returns, traveling all the way back to Europe, where he gets involved in some political squabbles, ends up in prison. And while he's in prison, he writes a book about his travels, this very famous travelogue by Marco Polo called Il Milione, the Thousand. And it's the 1,000 leagues he traveled all the way to China and back. And he writes about these incredible cities in China, and he writes about silk and cinnamon and cardamom and the power of Kublai Khan. And it's this incredible journey. In fact, if you've never read it, it legitimately is this incredible adventure going from Venice to the court of Kublai Khan and then back again. And Il Milione was incredibly popular in Europe. People love to read these adventure stories. They love to read the stories of Marco Polo. And Marco Polo's adventures made a particular impact on one boy in Italy. and his name was Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus really, really, really wanted to be Marco Polo. And we know this because one of the more bizarre books that has survived to the present day is that book there on the lower left. And that is the copy of Marco Polo's Il Milione, owned and annotated by Christopher Columbus himself. And there's a page from it that's been scanned in. The print is the story of Marco Polo. The handwriting off to the side, that's Christopher Columbus, who very carefully read Il Milione and decided he wanted to do the same thing Marco Polo did. So he took copious notes in his copy of Il Milione, and it's survived to the present day. It's absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. But by the 15th century, there was a problem that was developing with the Silk Road. Remember, the Silk Road goes through the Middle East, and a problem developed in the Middle East that started to close down the Silk Road. And that problem was the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Turks. The Ottoman Turks explode out of Central Asia in the 14th century, and by the 15th century, they have begun the slow process of building one of the greatest empires in human history, the Ottoman Empire. And you can see from the map on the left, the Ottoman Turks proceed to conquer most of the Middle East, and they center their conquest, and their conquests are fueled by their control of the Silk Road. And in the year 1453, they achieve one of their greatest victories, and that's what the illustration there is on the upper left. The Ottoman Turks conquer the last little fragment of the Roman Empire when they defeat and conquer the city of Constantinople, converting it from the last outpost of Orthodox Roman Christianity to the modern Turkish city it is today. Today it's called Istanbul. But the Turks based their wealth and based their empire off of the control of the Silk Road and off of the enormous profits that would come out of the control of the Silk Road. And they started to squeeze Europeans out of the Silk Road. They wanted the Silk Road to be controlled by Turks. They wanted it to be controlled by especially Muslims. And they didn't want Europeans, and they didn't want Christians on the Silk Road. And they did this because they thought that the wealth from this would fuel the advance of the Ottoman armies in what they viewed as their eventual conquest of Europe. They did not end up conquering Europe, obviously. But this caused a huge problem in Europe as Europeans are slowly frozen out of the Silk Road, as the Silk Road starts to shut down under the control of the Ottoman Empire. So there's the problem. The problem is that the Silk Road is shutting down. So now we've got to do something. We've got to create a solution to the problem of the Silk Road. And the solution launches the Age of Discovery. And it is particularly launched by that guy right up above my head. And his name is Prince Henry. He's known as Prince Henry the Navigator. He was the younger brother of the King of Portugal. And Portugal was at this time this tiny little country on the southwest corner of Europe. You can see it on the map. It's in yellow. It's a tiny little country. It's not especially rich. It's not especially prosperous. But they do have a firm tradition of sailing. They're very, very good sailors. They have a very good relationship with the sea. And Prince Henry the Navigator says, look, we have to solve the problem of the Silk Road. And the country that solves the problem of the Silk Road is going to become incredibly wealthy. So Prince Henry the Navigator basically starts what will become known as sort of, at least what I'm calling the Great Project of Portugal. And the Great Project of Portugal is to reach the lands of the Indies without going through the Middle East. In other words, to sail around the Ottoman Empire. So Prince Henry decides to do this. But to do this, Prince Henry says, look, this project is going to take forever. In fact, Prince Henry doesn't even live to see the culmination, to see the great project of the Portuguese completed. Sailing around the Middle East. And that means sailing around Africa. This is going to take forever. It's going to take the best shipwrights, the best navigators, the best mathematicians, the best astronomers in Europe. It's going to take an entire school to solve this problem. And that's what Prince Henry builds. he builds the great school of navigation at Lisbon, which is the capital of Portugal. And that school, which contains all the greatest mathematicians, astronomers, navigators, sailors, carpenters in Europe, is all dedicated to solving this problem. They are going to sail from Portugal, there on the left, to the lands of the Indies, which is right above my head. But to do that, you've got to sail around this huge continent to the south, and that's Africa. So the great project of the Portuguese is to reach the lands of the Indies by sailing around Africa. Now, the map you see above me, this is basically the world as the School of Navigation at Lisbon thought it was. This is the world that they thought existed, in the early 15th century. You've got Europe, you've got the Middle East, you've got the lands of the Indies. Oh, there's the Middle East. And then you've got this huge continent to the south, Africa. They knew that Africa had a west coast and they knew Africa had an east coast. They didn't know where the bottom of Africa was. And that's the problem. They've got to sail down the coast of Africa, around Africa, and reach India. And that's what they calculate. That's what they start planning to do. And the thing is, they knew the world was round. Everyone knew the world was round. Everyone since the days of the classic Greeks knew that the world was round. It's this myth of Columbus, that Columbus thought the world was round and everyone thought the world was flat. No. 15th century, every person knew that the world was round, but they didn't know what was in the world. Now, a lot of students kind of have a problem taking this map from the 15th century and kind of mapping it onto our current globe. So what I've done is I've taken a map of the world and I've kind of photoshopped basically how the Portuguese thought the world was. This is the world as Portugal imagined it, as created by the Great School of Navigation at Lisbon. You've got Europe, you've got Africa. They knew that Africa had an end point, but they didn't know where it was. There's Asia, so that's their plan. The plan of the Portuguese is to sail around Africa to reach the land of the Indies, and the land of the Indies, way over there. Now, they knew the size of the earth. That wasn't a problem. The thing is they just assumed it was this huge ocean. There was a massive ocean between Europe and the land of the Indies. And they knew that there was absolutely no way any ship could actually cross this huge ocean. So they didn't even try. They knew that theoretically you could sail west and reach the land of the Indies, but the ocean is just so huge, you would die halfway across. So this is what the Portuguese start to do. They're not going to cross this huge ocean, which they assume is empty. They're going to sail down the coast of Africa. And this is what they proceed to do. And they're going very slowly, they're going very carefully, and they're working with the local African kings they meet along the way. All of this gets very important later on. So there's the map of the Portuguese project. So this is what the Portuguese do. They'll have a fleet of ships will sail south along the coast of Africa. They will stop along the coast of Africa. They will make friends with the local African kings. They will buy an island just offshore, and they will build a castle. And they'll fill this castle with soldiers, with sailors, with food and weapons, and then they'll sail back to Portugal. And then the next fleet will leave Portugal. It'll stop at the castle, and it'll go maybe a month or two further down the coast, meet up with the African kings they find there, get into a trade negotiation, buy an island, build a castle on the island, fill it with food and provisions and weapons and soldiers, and sail back to Portugal. So basically they're making not one huge trip around Africa, but dozens of tiny little trips down the coast as they bounce from castle to castle to castle. So they bounce where they don't have a castle, and then they build a new castle. So what Portugal is doing is building this string of castles along the coast of Africa, making very good friends with the local African kings, trading with the African kings for mostly gold and ivory and the iron of Africa, and building a string of castles along the coast. And they're doing this in a very deliberate manner. First off, they actually do want a trading relationship with the African kings. There is no single king of Africa. There's many, many African kings. But the other thing they want to do is make sure that no other European nation can follow them, because they've got these castles. So if France or England or Italy or anybody else starts to sail down the coast of Africa, they're going to bump into one of these Portuguese castles, and the Portuguese castle is going to destroy that rival European ship. either just shoot it or send warships out to chase it, because Portugal doesn't want anyone else to use their route around the coast of Africa. This is one of the reasons they made really, really nice with the local African kings, is that if a French or an English ship or a Spanish ship moves along the coast, the African kings will detain them, hand them over to the Portuguese, and the Portuguese will kill them. All right? And they build these huge castles along the coast. And one castle in particular is absolutely colossal. It is located right there along the African coast. And this is going to become one of the most horrible places on Earth. And there it is on the left. One of the most haunted, one of the most terrible places on Earth because of what eventually happens in this castle. And the name of this castle is Elmina. Make a note of Elmina, because Elmina is going to show up in about a month in a successive chapter, and you're going to read about the terrible things that took place at Elmina Castle. But Elmina Castle is not built to do these terrible things. It's built in 1482 solely to protect the great project of the Portuguese. But not everyone agreed with the way that the Portuguese were doing things. There were a number of scholars who challenged the School of Navigation's view of the world. And one of the people that challenged that view was a young ship's captain named Christopher Columbus. So there were two different views on the world. You had the accepted view, which is that the world was huge, all right? But there was another group of scholars who argued that the world was small. And Christopher Columbus subscribed to this second idea of the world. Christopher Columbus viewed the world as being quite different from the Portuguese School of Navigation. And all of this comes out of a dispute about a book written by an Arabic mathematician called Al-Farghani. And on the upper left, that is the book by Al-Farghani. And Al-Farghani was updating the work of these Greek scientists. And basically, Al-Farghani calculated the size of a round Earth. And Al-Farghani basically calculated that the Earth is 6,500 miles around. But the argument is, what does Al-Farghani mean when he says a mile? Okay? Now, everyone else said, well, Al-Farghani is an Arabic scholar. So Al-Farghani, when he measured these, like the lengths of shadows and stuff, when Al-Farghani worked out all of this math, he's Arabic, so he's using the Arabic mile. And the Arabic mile is basically 2,161 meters. That's about, 7,000 feet in freedom units. But the other group of scholars that included Christopher Columbus, they argued, no, Al-Farghani is not using an Arabic mile like the ancient Greeks. Al-Farghani is using the Roman mile, which is actually substantially smaller. The Roman mile is 1,480 meters, which is basically 4,800 feet in freedom units. And so if you change the size of the unit that Al-Farghani is using, basically you come to a very different image of the world. And this is what Christopher Columbus did. And we know this because we actually have the guidebook of Christopher Columbus, where he basically makes these estimations of the size of the Earth. So Christopher Columbus sits down with Al-Farghani's book. He says Al-Farghani's using Roman miles, ergo, the Earth is different from what everyone thinks it is. It is now possible to sail from Portugal to the islands of the Indies. Columbus's calculation was that the islands of Chipangu, which is Japan, is only 4,400 kilometers west of the Canary Islands. That's 2,700 miles. 2,700 miles in freedom units. Columbus says, we can do this in 40 days. All right, we can do this. But the problem is, this is why math is important. Columbus was wrong, okay? Al-Farghani's math was absolutely spot on. He's like 99% accurate to the real circumference of the Earth. The Portuguese School of Navigation's math was correct. Columbus's math was way off. In fact, he's more than 66% off. So if you ever like bomb a math test, and you fail a math test by more than 30%, you're a better mathematician than Christopher Columbus. But it doesn't matter. This is the world that Christopher Columbus calculated. It is a small world with a small ocean between Europe and the lands of the Indies. That's the argument in terms of Columbus versus the Portuguese. Not the argument whether the world is round or flat, but whether the earth is big or small. The Portuguese school of navigation said it's a big earth with a huge ocean. Columbus and this other argument said, no, it's a small earth with a small ocean that we can easily cross. Columbus makes his case to the King of Portugal. He makes his case to the Portuguese school of navigation, and they absolutely refuse him. They're like, look, Columbus, your math is terrible. You're just going to sail in the middle of this huge ocean and everybody's going to die. And Columbus is basically laughed out of Lisbon. But Columbus finds another set of patrons. He goes to the newly founded kingdom of Spain, the great rivals of Portugal, and pitches this same idea. And after a bit of wrangling, they say, no, your math is way off, Christopher Columbus. There's absolutely no way. You're just going to sail in the middle of this huge ocean and die. So they turn him down. So Christopher Columbus fixes his math a little bit. He comes back in a year and pitches the same idea to the dual monarchs of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella. And they listen to him, and basically they say, look, you're almost certainly wrong, but you might actually be correct. So we're actually gonna buy this lottery ticket just on the off chance that you are actually correct about your calculations on the size of the earth. But we're not going to do it right now because we're in the middle of this huge war in southern Spain, a war against the last Muslim kingdom in Spain, a kingdom called Granada. So, come back when we've finished this war, and then we'll discuss this. Christopher Columbus agrees. And in the year 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella win their war against the kingdom of Granada. They destroy the kingdom of Granada. They create Spain more or less as we understand it today. Like, we think of Spain as this really old, ancient kingdom, but in 1492, it was almost a brand new kingdom. And they were very much worried about what Portugal was doing with Africa. So Columbus seems a safe bet. And they agree to fund his expedition. And that's why Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. And what he finds there, we will see in the next lecture, and I will see you there.